Welcome to the latest episode of Balls, Bats and Pucks podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Edwards, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by a good friend of mine, ESPN Baseball Analyst, Dan Szymborski. Dan, how's it going?
Going pretty well, Steve. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, it's just essentially like coming on the air. It's the Mets have won today. I mean, we went into Houston, kind of rolled over and died. So, just doing our part maybe to put a smile on some people's faces down there. I mean, they've had a pretty torrid time, and the Astros have obviously got caught up in that. But so yeah, I'm happy. I mean, afternoon baseball as well is a good thing because it means I don't necessarily have to have a late night in the UK either to actually watch a game for a change.
Yeah, and the Mets tend to lose quickly, so you can say, "Oh, I can go to bed. It's not in doubt." Right now, the New York Mets are kind of this conflict between: do we lose slowly and painfully, or do we lose quickly and horribly? That's their big question these days.
Well, I mean, today they decided to put a Big Ten spot on the board and then just let the Phillies creep back. And in the end, it was like, oh, no, we'll just put them away. It is only the Phillies and, we'll actually get that win. But, the thing I'm going to say this that annoys me right now is that it's September. Now, for me, September means pennant races. For a lot of people, it seems to mean the start of the NFL season. And when I say pennant race, I kind of joke around it because to me that means heartache for a Mets fan because we've had multiple collapses in September. I normally start thinking about next season by this point, or I get out a computer game and replay a season when the Mets were actually decent, so basically 1986. And I've come to realize about this, Dan, is that a lot of people celebrate the fact from a Mets point of view that Bill Buckner let that ball go through his legs. But that was the reason I became a Mets fan, and I didn't realize at the time that that was actually going to mean 30-plus years of misery. Had the Red Sox won that World Series, I would have probably been a Red Sox fan and had a few more World Series wins at that point.
They had their ups and downs, but the Mets had been mostly down, and sometimes very depressing, like the early to mid-'90s Mets. Once you got through them, you were pretty much a Mets fan for life. Once you survived that and you still rooted for the team, I have a friend of mine named Chris Dial. He's on the Sabre board. He has a Mets tattoo. So if he wants to stop being a Mets fan, then he has to have some, laser removal or something. So at some point you're committed. And I think at this point, you're a Mets fan till death.
Yeah, I mean, death to me can mean multiple different things because, it can mean the end of the season, which is normally around about June. I mean, Cespedes kind of helped us out with that a couple of years ago with the hitting home runs out of sight and actually giving us a bit of a pennant race and then obviously going to the World Series and then ultimately disappointment again because the real Mets turned up in the World Series and we managed to find a way to lose that one. So, I mean, what does September mean for you, Dan? Because, I mean, you're a baseball analyst. Surely you just ignore the NFL, right?
Oh, well, I enjoy football too, but I'm paid, obviously, to write about baseball. So unless the football game is really compelling, it's still baseball until baseball ends. And then I had to have something to do with my life during that period between the end of the World Series and the winter meetings. Because otherwise, then I have to connect with friends and family and do errands around the house and stuff. And I don't want to do that. I like watching sports a lot better than that.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. I mean, there is sports all year round, but, I mean, that basically means you become like me in a way because then you come back to the point of view of then baseball's kind of over, and baseball finished for me ages ago. So, yeah, I mean, I can talk about it, but at the end of the day, it's baseball is kind of over, and then it's onto the NFL. But, I mean, I wanted to go back a little bit. Back to the start of the season because, I mean, just want to cover the Mets just for a few more minutes and just indulge me a little bit here. But, I mean, the one thing about the Mets is that we've got this supposed really great rotation. I always felt like hitting was never going to be enough, and it's in one injury after another. There has to be something around the amount of injuries this team gets to... I mean, they find new ways to injure themselves. I mean, anyone that saw Wilmer Flores basically then decided to find a new way to injure himself of, you know what I'll do? I'll foul a ball off my face and break my nose. I mean, basically, I think because he was just at a point where I no longer want to play this season. But, I mean, it has to be a concern that all of these arms especially are just getting injured one after another.
What's especially troubling, even more than the copious amount of injuries, is that there seems to be all this drama around the diagnosis of these injuries.
Yeah.
You apparently had Steven Matz pitching through pain all season. You had the drama earlier this season when they wanted to do an MRI on Noah Syndergaard, and they said no. So they said, okay, we'll pick you anyway. And then, of course, you know what happened after that. You look at the whole Matt Harvey fiasco for the last 2 years, essentially, where diagnoses keep changing for what's wrong with him, and he comes back, pitches poorly, and they never seem to have an answer. So it makes me wonder exactly what the Mets are doing. Just really, it's one of the many aspects that makes me question what the Mets are doing. Their training staff, how they're evaluating and these injured players. And then, of course, even right now, when you look at another issue, the Mets, they're out of contention, and they're still playing Jose Reyes at shortstop. They're still playing Aoki in right. It's still like a bunch of over 30 guys that gives them no useful information about next season. So from top to bottom, pretty much on all cylinders, the Mets are just firing really poorly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story that came out today that I read that Matt Harvey is going to be going on short rest.
Yeah, because he wants to.
Yeah.
So, if you want to, by all means.
Yeah, you know, is it the inmates that are running the asylum? I mean, I wanted TC gone for a while. I mean, for anyone who follows me on Twitter will know that even going to the World Series for me wasn't enough because I think he has his faults, and it was a classic case of, right, okay, he's taken his team as far as they can go, got kind of lucky in a way to get that far during that season, but ultimately, do we really think he was a manager to deliver a championship to New York? Absolutely not. And it's, again, like stories like this that are coming out that it's just like, I mean, you've got to go, seriously. Everything's got to be scrapped and start again, and then hopefully we can try and get healthy. But I don't want to kind of ram home the point about the Mets. I mean, I'll move across that city for a second because obviously the guy that's been lighting up the baseball for the first half of the season, Aaron Judge, is obviously struggling in the second half of the season. And some of the comments I saw out of Yankees fans first half of the season, it was almost like the second coming of Babe Ruth almost. What have you made of Aaron Judge's struggles in the second half of the season, and did you see it coming?
Well, obviously anyone who was watching Judge shouldn't have expected him to because after the first half of the season, he had an OPS over 1,100. Nobody really should have expected that as his baseline. Now, that being said, he's been, quite poor the second half. He's still hitting some home runs. He still has the biggest problem is that the batting average is really low. Some of that is because he has a 247 batting average on balls in play in the second half when he was over 400 in the first half. But there's kind of with fans, there's kind of this tendency that they get way too excited during the good times and they get way too depressed during the bad times. Judge, what he looks like is he's going to be a solid, a B-plus slugger. He's not really a Hall of Fame type. He's not going to have that type of career. But people forget he's at like 5 or 6 WAR this season. So he could be terrible the rest of the year and still be a big part of what the Yankees have done this year. So while people got, too excited about him in the first half, the expectation going forward is still he's going to be a really solid player. So people need to just chill a little. But, people don't chill.
No, people don't chill, and I suppose what we're trying to say is that we really think he's not going to be the first half Aaron Judge. He's not going to be the second half Aaron Judge. He's going to kind of be somewhere in the middle. I mean, I'm old enough to remember a guy by the name of Kevin Muss who came on the scene for the Yankees.
Muss!
Early 90s. And he came on with like hitting home run after home run after home run after home run, and then, how long was he really a major player in New York? It was almost like a cup of coffee in the majors type thing. So Aaron Judge isn't like that, but I think, again, it is a classic case, I think, of too many people get too carried away and, this guy is hitting the ball out of sight. Yeah, he's impressive to look at, but can he really keep it up?
And, of course, you have people blaming the home run derby, which makes no sense. I don't get that. Oh, he's hitting poorly because he's in the home run derby that messed him up. Like, no, just stop, please.
It's just anything to blame around the All-Star festivities. I think everyone's kind of like rams home the point. Yeah, it's got to be something. It's the All-Star game. It's the home run derby. It's a few days off. It's it's something, and that's kind of like we're looking for blame somewhere along the lines. But you're talking about Judge, obviously, starting the season that well. Was there anyone, because I know you look at it from a projection standpoint at the start of the season with like the Zips in terms of like Diamond Mind and ESPN and stuff like that. Who are the guys that stood out as surprises compared with what the projections were, and maybe even the teams that benefited from that?
Well, another player who I actually also think is more real than Zips did at the time was Yonder Alonso of the Oakland A's. Zips, the projections did not see that coming because he had an unusual change. He drastically changed his swing profile coming into this season, which isn't something you really see players do at the major league level. But he's gotten a lot more loft when he hits the ball this year. It's made a big difference. Obviously, he hasn't stayed as hot, but the projections were definitely behind on Yonder Alonso. And another player they were behind on was Justin Smoke of the Toronto Blue Jays. I'm not quite as sold on Smoke as I was on Alonso, but he's really stepped up for the Blue Jays when they have Jose Bautista not hitting all season. They missed Josh Donaldson for a large part of the season. Troy Tulowitzki was mediocre and is out for the season. They got nothing from Kendrys Morales. And the team is just barely hanging on to relevancy. They've fallen out of it, but Smoke was a big reason they stayed interesting as long as they did. So that's another player who really just crushed his projections this year.
And I suppose on the other side of the foot is who disappointed you from where they were relatively supposed to be at the start of the season? Maybe not, forgetting about guys who are injured, but guys who were just like real big disappointments at this point.
Well, it's starting to get fixed now because he's slowly getting better. But Kevin Gausman was such a disappointment for me, both as a fan standpoint because I'm from Baltimore, so I root for the Orioles, and really from a projection standpoint because Zips has kept thinking that Gausman has been on the edge of this major breakout, and then it never actually happened for the first half. I mean, he was terrible in the first half. His ERA was near 6. He's pitching a lot better now, but I'm still holding my breath. He's the one that has just really just made me sad at many points this season. From a team standpoint, they're playing well now, but the Indians were really off their projections early on in the season. Kluber, his ERA was way up. Of course, they had a number of injuries. Tomlin had an ERA around 6 for a while. But they've kind of fixed that. When everybody's back now, I mean, Kluber's been untouchable since he's come back from injury 2 months ago. And they have Carrasco and Danny Salazar's coming back again. So they actually have near a 600 winning percentage now, so it's hard to say the Indians are having a poor season. But it was looking pretty worrisome there for a while around the midseason.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the Indians, I mean, we'll touch on a bit in a little while in terms of when we go down the divisions. But, I mean, for me, huge disappointment. I mean, Kluber's a guy that is a bona fide ace. It goes without saying. And for me, I think he will be the American League Cy Young Award winner this year. I mean, he's going to play a big part in how far that team goes. And he's a guy in the American League that you don't want to face. And the Indians are going to trot him out. And hopefully he'll be the one that will take them very, very deep in the postseason. And they're getting healthy to go along with that as well. They've won their 11 straight games. And they're playing really good baseball right now.
I just pulled up Kluber's game log. As late as June 9th, he had a seasonal ERA of 4.38. And he's down to 2.56 now. So that kind of tells you he hasn't allowed more than 3 runs in a start now since May, before he was injured, which is just an amazing stretch. Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. There was a game in July. But the general point stands that he has been unstoppable, and is a big reason why the Indians have finally been able to put away that division, because it was much closer than they would have liked for a long time. The Twins were right with them. The Royals were right with them. Now they have a 10-game lead, so that's not going to go away now. But it was, if you were in Cleveland, you were sweating for a while.
I think people in Cleveland have been sweating ever since the film Major League came out, because they're just waiting for, the reminder of all of those collapses and everything else over the years. And, I mean, they went to the World Series last year, kind of like the hard luck World Series of the Cubs and the Indians, who was finally going to end their long stretch. And I suppose the Indians feel that maybe this will be the year that they'll be able to do it. And as I say, for me, I think they'll come out of the American League and they will be a very, very tough team to beat. But I wasn't going to start with the American League because I have this thing that I really hate, the designated hitter. But as we're talking about the American League right now, we might as well stay over there. If we're talking about the Indians winning the Central, I mean, I think that's pretty much where we are. It's unfortunate that a lot of the divisions are already kind of wrapped up. But over in the East, there's a division that isn't wrapped up right now. The Red Sox have a 3.5 game lead over the Yankees. They've just recently been in a series against them. But things are going to get a lot easier in the schedule for the Red Sox the rest of the way. They have got a really easy schedule. I think there's only like 7 or 25 games against teams with winning records right now. But do we think the Red Sox are going to close out this division, or can the Yankees still hang around and maybe pep them to the post?
Well, the Red Sox do have some games against divisional rivals that would love to push them out of first place, like the Rays. I'm sure the Rays would love that, or the Blue Jays, to get some measure of revenge. I think that they do have a slightly better roster still than the Yankees. The Yankees, they made some pretty big moves at the trade deadline. The roster right now looks a lot better than the roster did back in April. So even though I thought in April they were like an 84-win team, now I think the roster is significantly better than that. It's like a 90, 91, 92-win team. But the Red Sox have the lead. They had that slim lead. And when you have two teams that are fairly close in ability, then they do tend to hold on to the lead. I mean, it's no slam dunk. It's probably, say, 75-25 in favor of Boston. New York still has some pitching depth problems after Pineda was injured that they haven't really completely fixed because they had issues before that. But the Yankees are a strong team, I guess is my meandering point.
So what about Chris Sale? Because I know he has struggled at times in September, and for them to win the division, he's going to have to pitch like the Chris Sale that we all know he can pitch, not the September Chris Sale.
But he has had probably the best season of his career, arguably. Maybe 2014 was better, but he's definitely in the Cy Young hunt. I expect him to do well in September. It's funny, Chris Sale, because Chris Sale, when he was first converted back to the rotation early on with the White Sox, the general belief about Sale was that he wasn't built like a pitcher because he's tall, he's thin, he looks kind of like Gumby. Hope you guys get the reference. I don't know how much how international Gumby was, but also it's like 40 years old, so I'm dating myself. And people said he had the motion that wouldn't survive being a starter, but he has. He's survived. He's been one of the most consistently excellent starters of the last half a decade, and he has a pretty durable record. He's never had a serious injury. So, I mean, you might think he's going to wear down in September, but he's also playing for something in September, which hasn't really happened in recent years with the White Sox. So it's a different situation. Despite my demeanor, I tend to be an optimist, and I think that he'll be fine in September. I think he'll be a big part of what happens with the Red Sox if they win a division or not. And he's a favorite to win the Cy Young. I'm an NL voter, so I can't vote for him, but I would probably vote for him this year for AL Cy Young if I could.
So you say Sale, I say Kluber. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out.
Yeah, we have another month to go, so I don't want to finalize my imaginary AL ballot quite yet.
And of course, if we move over into the West, the big story was Verlander going to the Astros. And for me, I mean, I was keeping an eye on this. It was on, then it was off, then it was on again.
That was a fun night about the Verlander trade, because you'd have at the same time one Detroit reporter saying, "I just heard it's off," while another reporter is saying, "I heard it's close." So you're like, okay, now which one of you guys heard this chronologically before the other one? Because we need to know.
It's almost like the fastest fingers on the tweet. Almost, it's like, well, I need to know what your finger typing per second is, because then we can maybe work out what order that's come out. But it was really crazy, because I looked at it, was like, oh, it's not going to go through, and the Astros really needed rotation help, and it was a move they had to make. I mean, we know what
it was a good move, though.
It is a good move.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a very good move to make, and it needed to happen because Astros are all in. We know that. So fortune favors the brave, and I do agree with the move.
But the nice thing about the Astros is, one, they got the Tigers to throw in some money for Verlander's remaining contract. They got $16 million, which isn't nothing. That's a quarter of the money he's owed. So they essentially have him for the next 2 years at $20 million per, $8 million per season. And the other thing is that the team did not give up any of the prospects that they considered to be those can't touch prospects, the ones that they won't move unless forced to. They hung on to Kyle Tucker and Derek Fisher, and they hung on to David Paulino and Yordan Alvarez. So from the Astros standpoint, it's like, they gave up some good prospects, but we have a pitcher who's still going to be here for 2 more years, and we didn't give up any of the players that we think are going to be the core talent in the future. So from that standpoint, I mean, you have to make the trade. What the Tigers were asking at the trade deadline was a little less reasonable. They didn't want to pay anything, and they wanted the top prospects, like the ones that the Cubs have given up in trades the last couple of years. But that wasn't going to happen. The Astros weren't that desperate, simply because the division's been in the bag, and they have good hopes of having Keuchel and Morton and McCullers and Fires, well, at least the first 3, pitching well in September and October. So I don't think that they necessarily were forced to make the trade, but I think it was a good trade, makes the team better, and it was smart, and I think it still keeps the team in contention the next few seasons.
Who has the best rotation now going into the playoffs? So some of the teams we talked about, is it the Astros? Is it the Red Sox? Is it the Indians? Who has it?
It's an interesting question because when you ask a month ahead of time, you're never really entirely sure if everybody's going to be healthy. So that's a pretty big dose of uncertainty because, of the way pitchers are. So if you said to me right now, who is the best in October, I'll say the Dodgers, simply because they have so much depth in that rotation. When Scott Kazmir or Brandon McCarthy, who are injured, are like the 6th or 7th best pitchers in the rotation, that's some pretty impressive depth. But if we get to the postseason and there are no nasty surprises on the way, I think I am going to take the Indians because they're not really the best from 1 to 5. But in the postseason, those 1, 2, 3 pitchers are disproportional influence to how good the team is, simply because they get such a high percentage of the innings compared to during the regular season when it's much more even. And when you have Kluber and you have Carrasco and you have hopefully Salazar, that's the best top 3 I think in baseball, even better than Darvish, Kershaw, than fill in the blanks, simply because of the injury risk. So I'll say Dodgers now, but it might be Indians in a month. That's such a weasel answer, isn't it? I love it.
Yeah. But it is true, though. I mean, it is so much uncertainty. I mean, teams position themselves at trade deadlines and all throughout the season, depending on, where they are to try and get to where they want to be. Come October, have that healthy rotation. And we could be sitting here now and, XYZ player could go down over the next couple of weeks or something, and then all of a sudden they're out of October, and that completely changes the picture. So it is very much almost like a what-if scenario. But as you've mentioned the Dodgers there, the Dodgers obviously were lighting up baseball for some time, win after win after win. They went on a hell of a run where they basically looked ridiculously unbeatable, and now all of a sudden they've hit a bit of a bad patch. Have you got any concerns about how they're playing right now, or is it a case of they maybe have taken their foot off the pedal a little bit? What is it about the Dodgers right now?
Well, one of the things about the Dodgers' losing streak is they haven't really been blown out of any games. There have been a lot of 3-0, 3-2, 4-3 type games that have been fairly close. And so when you lose a lot of close games, it's usually not as big a deal from a predictive standpoint. And secondly, they're just not really incentivized to try to squeeze out every last win, to try to tax the bullpen. When they look at it and they have a choice between pulling a pitcher early and just riding out the rest of the game with some long relief, or really trying to squeeze out an extra inning, it doesn't make quite as much sense to try to squeeze every last win out of it. Because what it comes down to is they have a 10-win lead for NL home field advantage to the playoffs. They have I think a 9 or an 8 game lead over the Astros. So they're almost certainly going to have home field advantage through the World Series should they reach it. So the Dodgers, it's nice to get a record and win 116 games and tie that record, but you're still thinking more. They have to think, would we rather win 116 games and have a worse chance at winning the World Series, or how about we win 107 games and have a much better chance? And I think in that situation, you're gonna take the better shot at the World Series over the regular season wins record, simply because it's the smart thing to do, and the Dodgers have built this team based right now on doing the smart thing.
How nice is it to be able to talk about the fact that we're looking at home field advantage being decided by record rather than an All-Star game?
Much. It was so ridiculous that, I mean, in the end, it benefited the Cubs last year because they could use Kyle Schwarber for an extra game at designated hitter. But there was just something so ridiculous about the fact that the Cubs, who won 103 games last year, didn't have home field advantage in the World Series because a couple Royals pitchers or a couple Royals hitters hit home runs off a Giants pitcher. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like they weren't even involved in that part. It's like, I mean, and baseball has all these excuses like we can't plan ahead of time about who would play where. But of course you do, because you have 10 teams in the playoffs. You're a company, you're an organization that collectively makes $10 billion a year, and you can't figure out the infrastructure of booking hotels and getting a stadium. I hated that so much, because the All-Star game also, when you say this time it counts, then you have to kind of play the All-Star game like a real game that counts, because they never do. It's like a beer league softball game where everyone just kind of pals around, gets their one at bat, goes to the bench, gives high fives, goofs around. You're not really playing it to win. So why make it matter for something that actually matters?
Yeah, I mean, in actual fact, the Cubs actually benefited from it, because maybe if the National League had won the All-Star game and the Cubs were able to only be able to have the DH in 3 of those games, it could have been completely different. So maybe they need to, thank the Royals and everything else that they did. But it was absolutely ridiculous. And for anyone who's followed me knows that I've ranted and ranted and ranted about it for so long. I mean, I'm a National League baseball purist for someone that's watched the game for over 30 years. And you couldn't have got any further from that by having an All-Star game decide who was going to have home field come the World Series. I mean, when I grew up watching baseball, the World Series home field was swapped around. You had the DH, I think, in alternate years from memory. It was some weird and wonderful permutations with how the World Series home field and everything else was sorted out at that time. And I think you had a guy like I want to say like Don Baylor. I think he was playing for the Twins maybe, and he could only play in certain games. It was ridiculous, and it's just like they've had one rule after another. And the easiest way to do it is home field for the team that has the best record. Every other sport can do that.
Yeah, I don't know what. It's not like it's this crazy out there idea. Like, well, how about the team that wins more games gets home field? It's 2017, and they've been around since 1876, and it took them all this time to figure out home field advantage for the team that wins more games. I mean, that's not that hard.
It really isn't that hard, but we'll move away from that, because me and you could rant about this for ages. And the Dodgers, as we go back to it just for a second, they'll be in the playoffs. Dave, we'll talk about like some World Series predictions in a second. Moving over to Central, the Cubs have got a 3.5 game lead over the Brewers. Again, it's much like the American League situation in that it's pretty much the only division that is potentially something could happen, but I really don't think so. I think the Cubs have now got this division wrapped up, and the Brewers are going to be basically fighting out for a wild card spot. It's
certainly about time, because for an analyst, there's a point at the season where where you get tired of saying, "Oh, they'll be fine."
Yeah.
Because really, they were a little behind in April. Oh, they'll be fine. May. Oh, they'll be fine. June. They'll be fine. At some point, you start to question yourself, like, what if they're not fine? Because you look at the roster, and there was no real reason for them not to be a really good team this year. I mean, sure, they've had some bad things happen, like John Lackey is probably nearing done now. And, Kyle Schwarber had some issues, especially early on in the season. But it's a team that should have been, a 95-win game team. It's obviously not going to happen now because they'd have to go 20-6 or something, which I guess they could do because, they've done that before. But I'm glad. I'm not a Cubs fan, but I was happy to see them win the World Series. But I'm happy to see them actually just playing like they're supposed to, because it's very frustrating as an analyst just to not do what you think they're going to do at all.
You put your reputation on the line and say, well, yeah, this is what they're going to do, and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. I should just do the opposite way of that for the Mets. Just they're going to be crap. That's it. Done. There's my analysis done already. But the Cubs now, you take a look at them, and again, you look at them as a very, very serious contender over in the National League, and they are the reigning world champions for a reason. They have had some issues, but they're still going to be a very, very tough team to beat, and I think they'll have the division wrapped up. For me, they are the Dodgers' biggest rivals in the National League in terms of who comes out of there to the World Series.
Yeah, they're still an extremely dangerous team. It's funny, they're still probably going to end up winning about 90 to 92 games, and that's not a bad team. No. It's going to feel like the worst 92-win team in history, simply because they won't feel like a 92-win team just based on how they got there. But they're already 14 games over 500. They're a better team than they were at the start of the season. They've made some additions. They added Jose Quintana, who hasn't really, completely gelled yet in the roster, but I think he'll be fine going forward. The Dodgers have to worry about that, because if you win 110 games and you lose to the team that won 90 games, people are going to remember that, and you'll be pointed at forever.
Yeah, in all sports, no matter.
It's unfair, but you're going to get pointed at. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, we'll always remember the Seattle Mariners and how many games they won, and they weren't world champions. It doesn't matter what you do in the regular season. It's what you do come playoff time, and I think a perfect example of that is the Washington Nationals. And I think part of their problem is they play in a division where, outside of where the Mets, were okay for a bit, they just tend to steamroll through this division, and I don't think it properly prepares them for playoff games. I think it's almost too easy in the regular season, and they've got to find a way, I think, to get out of that mentality.
Yeah, they have not had a lot of challenges this season. They've pretty much walked over the NL East. That it's just really a lousy division other than the Nationals. I know people have been talking about the Marlins as possibly catching up, but the Marlins are not a good team. They have a ton of holes. I can't see them. They're going to finish the season below 500 with in all probability. It's useful to have pretty good competition over the season. They played too many games against Powder Puffs, but I do still think they're a really good team, and they could very well go deep in the playoffs. They have that front end pitching. They have the front end offensive talent. Even though some of it they got out of nowhere. Ryan Zimmerman coming back from essentially being toast, because if you want another player I was wrong about coming into the season, it was Ryan Zimmerman. I had him barely replacement level because he's been injured. He was one of the worst players in baseball last year. And even though he's cooled off, he looked like an MVP candidate for 2 months. And then Dan Murphy is just repeating his 2016 season. So they do have that top-end talent. They could surprise and go deep. So I wouldn't count them out considerably, but I think if I was in their shoes, I'd have been happier if I had a little more adversity this season with my competition.
I can't believe you mentioned Daniel Murphy to a Mets fan.
I'm sorry.
It's like the.
But you see, I always joke though that because the teams that lose to the inferior teams always get remembered. And for analysts, we always get remembered for our worst analyses on trades. No matter what, everyone remembers that I hated the Alfonso Soriano Brad Wilkerson trade for the Yankees. Excuse me, for the Rangers, and sorry, I'm getting all backwards. But I preferred to have Brad Wilkerson than Alfonso Soriano at the time, which people still remind me about more than a decade later. And so everyone looks and says, hey, we didn't see Dan Murphy coming, but really nobody saw Dan Murphy coming. Yeah, he had that big postseason when he was still with the Mets, but I don't think anyone really expected him to be an MVP type last year, which is just crazy because I never really thought of Dan Murphy as an MVP type.
No, I didn't either. I could have gone back and forth on that. I could see both sides to that as a Mets fan, as an analyst, that there was a good reason to keep him. There was a reason not to keep him. So I can completely understand that. It's just one of those things that always irks me because it followed obviously the playoff side of things. But I want to go back to you talking about the Marlins for a second there. We talk about the NL East. And the fear again is obviously they've had some ownership changes. And we're hearing stories around, cutting payroll. Now, does that potentially mean that Giancarlo Stanton is finally going to get moved? And who would be willing to take on that contract?
Well, one of the good things for the Marlins, if they want to trade him, is that Stanton has done a lot this season to kind of recover his value. It's weird thinking about it, but this is the first time Stanton has hit 40 home runs in a season. Even though he's noted for his power, he's never hit 40 home runs before, simply because he's missed so much playing time during the years, just from injuries, some freakish injuries, of course, getting hit in the face, but also he missed large parts of 2 seasons with knee injuries, another chunk with hamstring injuries. So the question was, could he stay healthy? Because if he can't stay healthy, then he's not going to be anywhere worth near that amount of money that's owed, which is an obscene amount. And what makes it riskier is that there has an opt-out. So if it's a good deal for the team, he can opt out. And if it's a bad deal for the team, he doesn't have to opt out. So it would have been a lot harder to move the contract last year than it would be this winter. But the Marlins, they're kind of stuck between, I guess, a rock and a hard place, simply because their ownership groups, both of them, Huizenga and Loria, have never really supported the team long term. So it's really killed off to an extent the Marlins fan base, to the extent where they probably can't afford to keep Stanton and still put together a good team. But then if you trade Stanton, does the new ownership saying screw you to a whole new generation of Marlins fans? So that they're in a really problematic situation where I think they will have to trade him if they can, but they're going to have to really spend essentially a generation putting together good teams, not blowing them up, and bringing those fans back to games. Because I don't know how to repair that situation, because the Marlins are now 25 years old, and they've always been that team that kind of just competes, then blows everything up, says we need a new stadium, and then doesn't spend the money. And so, I mean, can baseball work in Miami at this point? I'm not even sure the answer to that question.
I don't think it can. I mean, sitting here though, thinking about it, I mean, they've had 2 World Series titles in their existence. They're a short existence, and yet they've had 2 World Championships. And as you rightly say, I think it was pretty much the year after '97 where they spent all the money to get that team out there, and then just got rid of it pretty much straight away. And it was really, really hard to see. And ever since the title in 2000 in the 2000s, it was pretty much exactly the same thing again. Obviously, they've been hit by tragedy with Jose Fernandez situation, and now you've got Stanton, who is the one guy that is the franchise marquee player. Can you even really get equal value back for him at this point? That's going to be the other hard thing. Is teams going to take on the contract. It's not a great scenario. I think you have to ride it out and kind of let Stanton be your marquee player and try and build whatever you can around him, but ultimately still know the fact that at best you're probably going to be about a 500 team. And
then you get to the problem of Christian Yelich and Marcell Ozuna. then how do you keep them too? Because they are nearing free agency as well, and they don't have long-term contracts. So they have a lot of problems to face. It's one of the most daunting challenges I think any franchise faces right now is what do you do in Miami? I know there's this idea that Derek Jeter's name is going to magically turn things around, and I guarantee you when they have a good season, there'll be a lot of really stupid articles written about how it's Derek Jeter's knowing how to win that helped them. But if you had to give me, if I had like $1 billion and I was going to go buying a team, I think the Marlins are the ones I'd least want to try to get involved with, just because the challenges are so much. It's like a restaurant that wins a Michelin star, but occasionally puts poison in the soup. And you don't have to go to a restaurant and get poisoned that often before you stop going back forever, even if they're occasionally pretty good. Because, I mean, you don't want to be poisoned. I mean, most people don't. I don't know. Maybe it's someone's fetish. But the team, when you win a World Series, that's your opportunity to capitalize and build a new generation of fans. When I was a little kid, I can't deny that the '83 Orioles helped make me even more of a baseball fan as a little kid. But the Marlins, as you say, they never did that. They blew up the team both times. So they didn't get any real long-term benefit out of their World Series championships. They were just trophies. It didn't lead to anything. It didn't lead to a new Marlin way or a new core that stayed for that they would talk about, 50 years later. It just led to a trophy, and that's it. Yep. And they are a little screwed right now.
They are pretty much like the shortest dynasties. I mean, that's pretty much what you could even call them that, but if you can go anywhere near that, that's what they would be. And I kind of want to say to Derek Jeter as well, get used to not seeing baseball in October. You enjoyed that as a player. You're not going to have it now. Just be aware of the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to use an English parable, like the Yankees were the Plantagenets and the Marlins were King Stephen. I haven't worked out how that all works out, but that's kind of the dynasty equivalent, the dynastic comparison.
Yeah, this is it. We're not trying to rain on a Marlins parade, and I'm sure all Marlins fans, listeners, or maybe one of them maybe will have something to say about it. But they're not going to be in the playoffs anytime soon. But thinking about the playoffs, it's not that far away now, and we kind of touched on who we might think will win the divisions and playoffs and everything else. And it would be amiss of me not to kind of get a bit of a World Series prediction out of you, as you are the prediction man, Dan. So come on, put your head on the line and tell me your World Series prediction as it stands right now.
Right now, I'm going to say Dodgers over Indians.
See, I would go with Dodgers over Indians, but I actually feel like almost like a bit of a Cinderella story, and I think the Indians may very well beat the Cubs.
You think it'll be the revenge of
it'll be the 2000? Revenge. I'm one of these people who likes to see a bit of a revenge story, and I don't want to kind of go down like the NBA route with their whole Warriors Cavs love affair and all that, but I think the Indians over the Cubs, they could put their little run to rest of where they haven't had a world championship. And I think that's potentially what we're going to see, because I think everyone's been talking about the Dodgers all season long, and I think they're going to fall at the last hurdle. The Indians have shown lately that they are the best team in the American League, and I think they've got everything in place. They've got the experience from last time. They'll remember what it was like to lose a world championship last year, and I think they'll use that as motivation to win one this time around.
It would be a lot of fun for the Indians to win the World Series. I cannot deny that at all. You mentioned Major League earlier, and that was actually a really good movie for the Indians, simply because, like the Cubs, the whole Major League movie and the pop culture around it and the popularity, it kind of made those Indians into lovable losers instead of just depressing losers, which is what they were before the movie came out. Because now they look back at some of the really bad Indians teams. They're like, oh, it's just the Indians. But you see, nobody has any romanticism about bad Padres teams. No one goes, oh, the Padres, I love them. Like, no one loved the Padres. So So the Indians got to become lovable losers like the Cubs did. So maybe that's what it takes to reverse a century of futility.
I seem to remember, and I can't think off the top of my head actually when Major League come out, but I know it's like around about 20 years ago. But the Indians were actually a pretty decent team back then in the mid-90s. They went to the World Series in 95 and in 97. So it was almost a bit of fun, really, that the movie came out and the Indians actually weren't that bad. I actually wanted the Indians to win in 95 because being a Mets fan, hate the Braves, would have quite happily had the Indians win that World Series with a guy like Albert Bell and players like that being a part of their team. So I think the time is now right for the Indians to win a World Series, and I think it'll be fun to see. And if they could just trot Charlie Sheen back out as Ricky Vaughn, it would just be so much fun. They have to go down that route at some point. Not just even just throw the first pitch. They'll be fine. Be great.
I was my friend Phil and I. We were actually part of the crowd because they filmed Major League 2, the sequel. They used Camden Yards for Cleveland, and they got a whole bunch of Baltimore people, something like 20,000 Baltimore people to come and to fill up the stands, and they gave us all Indians gear to wear. I still have my Indian shirt from that somewhere. So I don't think you can ever actually see me on camera, but I was there.
How many times have you watched the movie just to see if you can see yourself on film?
Well, it was harder in those days because we saw the VHS tapes, and those weren't good for that kind of spying. Now you can just click and go back and forth, and no, you definitely can't see me. It's very sad.
Is it not one of those things like you kind of put the request in for the 4K movie now? Look, I want the 4K movie because I just want to make sure that I am actually in this movie now.
Yeah, I wish I could have made my on-camera debut there, but alas, it was not meant to be.
Alas, you are an ESPN baseball analyst instead, rather than a movie extra for what was actually a pretty decent sequel. To be fair to me, I actually quite enjoyed. Well, we won't talk about the third one because that was just absolutely awful.
Yeah. Where they all go, I never really understood the third one. The whole concept didn't make sense. Why are they all back in the minors?
Yeah,
it was I thought they were they were good in Major League 2. Did they all just get demoted? I don't quite understand this. I mean, it wasn't everybody, obviously, because by the time the third one rolled around, everybody a lot of the name guys didn't want to come back anymore. But Major League 2 was a fun movie. Not as good as the first, but it was still pretty good.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I still like it as a sequel. It's still, a baseball movie that I will watch. It's not as good as the original, but so in terms of World Series predictions, I've gone for the Indians to win the World Series over the Cubs, and Dan's gone for the Dodgers over the Indians. So, Indians fans, you should enjoy the fact that we both think, hopefully, you'll make the World Series. One of us may not be happy at the end of it, but we'll see from that particular point of view. Dan, as always, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. We haven't chatted in ages, apart from the odd tweet here and there. But my final thought on it, and it does go back to the Mets again, and I did tweet this out today. I do actually want to start a campaign to get hold of the world's resource of bubble wrap and send it to New York, because I just feel that's the only way Mets players are going to stay healthy. And maybe I need to send it off to spring training for next season.
But here's the question. With the poor diagnoses of the Mets training staff, will they know what bubble wrap is? They might think it's like a cracker. Oh, this is orange juice.
Oh, pop. Oh, this is actually quite fun. Thank you.
Oh, they are. They are fun. I had some here in my office on the floor the other day because I'm a slob. And my cat was walking over, and his claws were popping some of them, and he was getting scared. Well, not scared, but he was getting, I don't know, the kind of that cat concern / scared / curious. He didn't know he was doing something fun, but he was.
Yeah, just pleases you. But yeah, bubble wrap. No matter how old you are, no matter who you are, it's a lot of fun. But on a serious note, the Mets really do need it. So if you have any lying around, we'll tweet out the address to send it to, and I'm sure the the Mets will be quite glad to have it because they definitely do need it. Anyway, I'd like to thank Dan for joining me on the Balls, Bats and Pucks podcast. You can find all the links for Twitter, Facebook, etc. in the notes for the episode. But where can people find your wonderful stuff, Dan? And it's always fun getting you to say your name and sound it out.
Yeah, I have. My name has been my cross to bear for almost 40 years now. I've had to spell this name. Well, you can find my work at ESPN.com, at Szymborski on Twitter. That's DSZYMBORSKI. You can find me at Fangraphs here and there. I do a weekly chat on Wednesdays. And that's pretty much where you can find me.
And I'm sure we'll get Dan back on as we get a bit nearer towards the playoffs and see whether or not our predictions have come true. But in the meantime...
Yeah, it'll be the Brewers and the Twins probably after all this.
Yeah. Somebody will be happy. I mean, the Twins will be pretty much a throwback to the late 80s, early 90s, and Brewers.
The TV people would not be happy with a Brewers-Twins World Series.
Analysts would, though.
Oh, I would. See, as an analyst, I root for chaos. I'm still hoping to get that 7-team tie for the AL wild card, the second wild card, and see if baseball has a plan of what to do with a 7-team tie.
It'll be fun. It can happen, but we don't think it will. But as I said, we will speak to Dan again. We will be going off topic, I'm sure, and talking baseball and everything else. But I've been your host, and you can find me on Twitter at TalkSportsSteven. But until next time, it's a good night.